Hi, my name is Justin Scanlon. Welcome to this presentation about tips for writing a quality conference abstract for the 2019 Occupational Therapy Australia National Conference and Exhibition. This presentation is based on a presentation originally developed by Professor Tammy Hoffman in 2011, and I am the current Conference Scientific Program Committee Chair for the 2019 conference. So, of course, your abstract should be related to the theme of the conference. And the conference theme for the 2019 conference is Together Towards Tomorrow. As an explanation of this theme, Together brings and focuses our attention on the different kinds of ways occupational therapists work in partnership and collaborate with consumers, communities, colleagues, and many other people to support optimal occupational performance, health, and well-being of a variety of stakeholders. And Towards Tomorrow focuses us to think into the future. So what will practice look like in the future? How can we respond to changing needs? How can we practice effectively within changing systems? And also, in preparing for the future, we must reflect on and learn from the positives in the past, but also some of the challenges we've faced in the past as well. So as you'll see, the theme is quite broadly inclusive of a lot of the ways and a lot of the projects and presentations and research that occupational therapists will be engaged in. So the next thing to think about are some early decisions. Before you start writing your abstract, it's a really good idea to think of your topic and ask yourself, why would my idea or project or research be of interest to an occupational therapy audience? So, of course, people attending the conference won't exclusively be occupational therapists, but the vast majority of attendees will be occupational therapists. So ask yourself, how can I direct my abstract so it will be of interest to those practitioners? So, is there something novel about my project or my research? Is it something that's a bit of a hot topic at the moment? Is it something that people would be interested in? Could your project or research, could it help to inform practice change? Could it be a theoretical piece that inspires debate amongst the profession? Could it provide best practice evidence? All of those things are things that will captivate and interest your audience and will get people into the room to listen to your presentation. Your abstract is the key way that people, firstly, your abstract will be used to determine whether your presentation should be included in the conference, but then your abstract will be used by delegates to say, should I go to this presentation or that presentation? So things that are captivating and interesting are really, really helpful to get people into the room and listen to your wonderful ideas and the outcomes for your research or your project. It could be a deeper dive, a more detailed analysis of data from a larger project. It could be new practices, new ways of supporting better outcomes, and it could be examples and descriptions of partnerships and new ways of working in changing contexts. So there's a whole variety of sort of different things that will be interesting to your audience and will help inform people when they're deciding which presentations they'd like to go and see. So once you've got your topic, the next decision is the format of your presentation. So would the information that you want to present, would it be best presented as an oral presentation, which is where you stand in front of an audience and you speak for 8 or 12 minutes and you're able to present your ideas and have some questions afterwards. A poster is a format of presentation where static information can be consumed and understood by an audience quite quickly, and a really good poster presentation can actually be more impactful than speaking for 12 minutes. They say a picture says 1,000 words, and in many ways a poster can say up to 5,000 words, and a really well-designed poster can really capture people's imaginations. Then you might also wish to deliver a workshop, which is a longer presentation style where people are actively engaged in doing particular activities and learning about things in a more detailed way. It should be noted that in each conference there's a very small number of workshops, and abstracts that are submitted for a workshop are only considered for a workshop. So it's very, very important to make sure that the information you're presenting can only work as a workshop. And then finally, an occupation station. Now, this is a new innovation that we've introduced to the 2019 conference, and it was adopted from the College of Occupational Therapists annual conference in the UK. And essentially what it is it's the presentation of a particular occupation that's used in a therapeutic context. And during the presentation, in inverted commas, participants are actually engaging in the occupation, and the presenters will explain a little bit about the rationale, the theory behind the use of this occupation, and then guide people through and talk about how it's actually used in practice. So we're really excited about this type of presentation and look forward to it being a really new, interesting addition to the conference. It should also be noted that the occupation station abstracts, only a small number will be accepted into the conference and will be reviewed separately by a subcommittee along with the workshop abstracts. So after you've sort of come up with your topic and thought about the format of your presentation, then we definitely want you to go and have a look at the call for papers and abstract submission guidelines on the website. Really, really important that you know these back to front, and because if you don't follow those guidelines, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because your abstract won't be rated as highly as it would be if you'd followed those submission guidelines. So make sure you know them. Your abstract can be a maximum of 300 words, and so it's not a huge amount of space for you to make a really impactful statement. So you need to, and we'll go through more later on, but you need to get the best bang for your buck out of every single word. No tables or figures are accepted in the context of the abstract. References are generally not required. If you must have a reference within your abstract, then it must be cited within the abstract itself and the full reference be provided. So that takes up some extra words, and but must be included if you have a citation. Additionally, you should avoid abbreviations and acronyms. In some circumstances, it might be necessary to include them, but make sure in the first instance that you have given the full name and then the abbreviation or acronym thereafter. But in general, if you can avoid the use of abbreviations and acronyms, then please do. Additionally, a really important note, that these abstracts will be published in a special issue of the Australian Occupational Therapy Journal. And given that it's in the Australian Occupational Therapy Journal, we need to follow their style guidelines. And one of their style guidelines is that the abbreviation OT must not be used. So you must write out occupational therapy or occupational therapist throughout your abstract. Do not use the abbreviation OT. So the next step is to select your methodological category. Descriptions of the methodological categories are included on the website, so make sure that you have a clear understanding of what is contained within each of these different categories and select the most appropriate. I will make special note of the review paper category. Now, these papers presented within this category should follow a specific and replicable process of selecting literature. So it could be a scoping review methodology, or it could be a systematic review methodology. Narrative reviews, which report on a range of literature and provide a bit of a summary, tend to be a little bit less objective and are more difficult to replicate. Therefore, for narrative literature reviews, we suggest that they be included not as a review paper, but as in the other category. Another note about review papers is that following feedback from delegates at conference over the past several conferences, review paper authors who are selected for an oral presentation of a review paper will be required to focus on implications for practice very much significantly within their presentation. In previous years, people have described the methodological process in a lot of detail and then only given a very brief implication for practice. In this year, in the next conference, we will require presenters to ensure that they really focus on what practitioners, what occupational therapists should do with this information, not be too focused on how this information was gathered. And more information will be provided to presenters who are accepted for an oral presentation of a paper in this category. So if you want to have a look at different examples of well-written abstracts, you can go to the Call for Papers page of the conference website, and there's a whole range of different examples of abstracts that were rated very highly for the 2017 conference. And these are across all of the different categories. So the structure of your abstract, you should start with a title. It's not actually in your abstract, but your title is really important. And then an introduction or a rationale for your project, and you select one of those. So you don't have introduction or rationale as your heading. You will have introduction as your heading, or you will have rationale as your heading. And then next section is objectives, and then your method, or your approach, your results or your practice implications, and then conclusions. You should note that suggested headings for occupation station abstracts are slightly different, and we will discuss those a little later in the presentation, and further information is also available on the website. In the following slides, we will go through each section of the abstract with some tips. So, when you're deciding on your title, remember that your title will be, a lot of people will decide to attend or not attend your presentation solely based on the title. So it's probably the single most important part of your entire abstract. So your title needs to be clear, it needs to be informative, and it needs to contain all of the key elements of your presentation. So sometimes people will think that a really snappy, catchy title that's really interesting might captivate people's attention, but in some ways it can just confuse people. So, you know, a catchy title might be, "Oh, wow, that's interesting," as a title. And then people might go, "Oh, that's intriguing," and might turn up just because their interest has been piqued. But probably as many people, if not more people, would go, "I don't know what that's going to be about, so I won't go. I'll go to something else that I know is going to be relevant for me." So try to be sure that your title is quite informative. You should avoid very short titles because they tend not to be informative, but you should also avoid very long titles because they just become really clunky and they don't fit the word count either. So your title needs to be fewer than 25 words. But if you are getting to that almost 25 words, then maybe you should reconsider the length of your title anyway, because it might be verging on being too long. Sometimes a title and a subtitle can be a good way to maximize the informativeness of your title. You might consider including the study design in the title. So title of presentation, colon, a qualitative study or a mixed method study. So to help people understand not only the topic, but the research design used as well. Your title is so important that it should be the last thing that you write. You should make sure that your abstract is written and is really clear, and then you write the title to capture what you've written in the abstract itself. The next section is the introduction or rationale. So this section should be a punchy and clear and really nice way of setting up what the problem is or the topic and why people should care about it. Why is this important for occupational therapists? What kind of thing are you seeking to explore more? What kind of problem are you trying to solve? The introduction or the rationale will sum up in a very short space what's known about the issue, what remains unsettled or controversial, and what the overall kind of goal of your study is. Don't just, it's best when you're presenting your introduction is don't just say, this is what's known about this topic, because then it's just a bit of a summary. It doesn't draw people in. And so what you should aim to do is to frame the issue as a puzzle or a problem or a gap or a weakness in our current knowledge, and then tell us how you're going to help solve that and why, and essentially why your work or why the project or why this presentation is important for practice and why people should attend. The next section is the objective, and this could be the objective of the project or the practice change or the research itself, or an objective of the presentation. And so the objective, an example would be the objective of this presentation is to encourage occupational therapists to think about topic X. And so you're describing what you hope the presentation would achieve, And so you could talk about the objective of the study, the objective of the presentation, or you could talk about a combination of both. So both talk about the objective of the study, but also the objective of the presentation. That can work quite well and can really engage your audience. But it depends on the nature of the topic and the style of the presentation. So next is your method or your approach. So in this section, people need to really understand what it is that you did in your study, or the approach that you took to the particular project that you're describing in the paper. So this should, if it's a research study, you should absolutely state the study design. It should describe the process of participant recruitment, inclusion, exclusion criteria, the ways that data were collected, and the assessments or instruments that were used. Now, this is important, but it can be really easy to go overboard and use up too many of your words in that part of the method. So be sure that you're really quite concise. But at the same time, you give enough details for your peers to understand what was done. In this section, it's generally best to avoid reporting actual data. So the numbers of participants or baseline characteristics are generally presented in the results section rather than in the methods section. If it's not a research project, then this section will describe how the project was undertaken. And if it's a more theoretical kind of paper, then you might select to use approach as your heading, and then describe the approach that you will take in terms of supporting your audience to understand and explore this particular topic that you're presenting. Then we come to the results or the practice implications section. Now, this is a section that is really, really important for you to concentrate on. This is the section of the abstract that tends to be most frequently poorly written. And omissions and inaccuracies are quite common. And a lot of people in previous years have lost marks because the results section has been poorly presented. So initially you start by describing the study sample, the size, the characteristics, etc. And then you go on to actually report the results. And so when you're reporting results, if you're saying that something is that, Group A performed significantly better than Group B, for example, then you shouldn't just state that, but you should back that up by giving the key values. If you've done a statistical test to determine differences between groups, then you should report the test statistic. So if it was a t-test, or if it was an ANOVA, if it was a chi-squared, you should report the test statistic as well as the p-value. One of the mistakes that people make is that they will report only the p-value, or they won't report anything at all. They'll just say, oh yeah, and there was a difference between these two groups. That undermines the robustness of your presentation. So make sure that you give the results of your statistical tests, and if space permits, the mean values or absolute values as well can be really helpful. So another thing when we're talking about differences is that if you say that groups are different, or that one group was better than the other, then you must be able to back that up with a statistical test that says the results for these groups were statistically significantly different. If one is just numerically higher than the other, but it's not statistically different, then we cannot say that it's different. And so you shouldn't say that it's different in the context of your abstract. And you must provide data that's presented in this section must be there to support the conclusions that come later. One of the other areas that people fall down on is that they will overstate their results in their conclusion, or their conclusion will include things that can't be backed up with what's presented in their results. So it must be consistent between your results and your conclusions. During this section, make sure you stay focused. Present data to support or to answer the research questions that you've presented in your aims or objectives section. And finally, we do allow submission of abstracts that refer to projects that haven't completed data collection yet. However, saying something like results will be presented is really going to undermine your ability to get reasonable ratings for this particular section. So if possible, you should give some preliminary data and say initial analyses have demonstrated that or suggest that. Or if you don't have any initial results, then at least an indication of the type and range of data that will be presented so that people will have a better understanding of what they will be going to see, and make sure that what's included in your abstract is actually presented when we get to the conference. For non-research papers, then practice implications really is just a summary of, as a result of this project, or as a result of this theoretical exploration that we've done, these are the messages that occupational therapists should take away. This is the kinds of things that people should consider in their practice. And then conclusions. These, again, should be punchy and powerful. These are if somebody's read your abstract, this is what will remain with them when they're finished. So you want to make sure that it's really clear and gives people a real good summary of what you've found in this project or this study. So it should be straightforward, brief, and specific to what you have found in your study or concluded from your project. You provide, you don't just repeat yourself, but provide a summary of the most significant findings and the implications of these. Be really careful not to overestimate or overstate or understate the importance of your findings. Probably most of our projects won't revolutionise the world, although some of them might. But we want to say, this provides very substantial evidence that this change in practice is helpful for supporting better outcomes, or some preliminary evidence for the validity of this particular instrument, or preliminary evidence for the usefulness of this particular intervention. So you've got to make sure that your conclusions are balanced with the strength of your results. Your conclusions obviously should have a strong link to your title, your method, and your results, and give someone a take-home message. What is it that is if you have just one sentence to describe what somebody should learn from this abstract in this presentation, then that should be in your conclusion. And then finally, avoid really vague statements like further research is needed or results will be important for occupational therapy practice. Avoid that for a couple of reasons. One is that it's using up very, very valuable words. And so those words are words you can't use elsewhere. And also they're kind of just vague. Most research will end up in a position where more research is needed. And hopefully results will always be important for occupational therapy practice. So you can say those kinds of things, but be very careful to be specific. So what is the next step in terms of the next research process that should happen? So this was an observational kind of trial. Therefore, we need to replicate this in the context of a controlled trial so that we can ensure that the results seen here weren't due to chance or weren't due to the progression of time, for example, and describe how results will be important for occupational therapy. What are the implications? So the more specific, the more powerful your conclusions are going to be. Okay, so for occupation station, then and for workshop presentations, there can be a variety of formats that you use for the abstract, but this might be a useful format. Start with an introduction, a rationale, a session plan which describes what people will be doing during the occupation station session or during the workshop, and some learning outcomes. More information about these and more description is available on the website. You should note that, as I've mentioned previously, abstracts for occupation station and workshop presentations will be reviewed separately by a subcommittee of the conference scientific committee. And so only a small number of these types of sessions will be included in the conference. And abstracts submitted in these categories won't be considered for other categories. So when you're considering submitting an abstract around this, I definitely encourage you to do it, but do be mindful that if you're not selected for an occupation station or you're not selected for a workshop, then that abstract won't be considered for an oral presentation or a poster. So the abstract review criteria that we use were originally developed by the Canadian Occupational Therapy Association, and we've used these review criteria for OTA conferences since 2011. We've done some research studies into the internal and construct validity of the abstract review criteria as a rating instrument, and there's quite solid evidence for its internal and construct validity, which is really helpful to know and should give you confidence that the review process is both fair and robust in terms of using a good instrument. Your abstracts are rated according to criteria in 3 sections. So quality of presentation, which includes 5 items, educational value, which includes 3 items, quality of the written abstract, which has 2 items. So 10 items in total, and each is rated on a scale of 1 to 5. So the overall total score can range from a low of 10 to a high of 50. The full description of the criteria are available on the Call for Papers section of the website, but I will go through each of the sections in a little bit more detail on the following slides. So the first one is the quality of the presentation content. And so as you see from this, each one is related to each section of your abstract. And so it's really important to remember that each of your sections are worth the same amount of marks, in inverted commas. So each one should be as strong as the rest. As I've said previously, one of the areas that people tend to get lower ratings for is item D, or the results or the practice implications. So this is a really important area to focus on and make sure that that's really well articulated. And if you don't have results to report yet, then giving people enough information to know specifically what it is that you will be presenting in terms of results. If you don't have results in your abstract, then you're very unlikely to get a rating of 4 or 5 for that criterion, but you might get a 3, or in some very, very unique circumstances, you may actually get a rating of 4. But don't waste marks in terms of not presenting that section really strongly. The next section is educational value. And so in this section, as raters, we think about what's the bang for your buck that delegates are going to get from attending this particular presentation. So will it have interest and appeal to an occupational therapy audience? It's a really important consideration. There have been in the past some abstracts that have been submitted that really would be of reasonable kind of scientific rigor, however, would have very, very limited application to occupational therapy practice. And so we need to think about how this will be an interest and be informative to occupational therapists who are attending the conference. Then we rate whether it's an important contribution to practice, research, theory, or knowledge. So that's really about, goes to the rigor of the science or the approach, and that people will gain important information from the information that's associated with the abstract. And then finally, novel or innovative contribution. So we want this conference to be cutting edge. We want it to be talking to the future. We want to be talking together towards tomorrow. And of course, a novel or innovative contribution that explores new areas or that looks at new evidence for existing processes or interventions are always really helpful to really support people's increased knowledge and supporting best practice. And then finally, the last two relate to the quality of the written abstract. And these should be reasonably easy to get reasonably good ratings for. However, there are a lot of circumstances where people don't get good ratings. So the first one is self-contained. So it shouldn't include abbreviations or acronyms or quotes or citations or in-text references. So it needs to stand by itself. People will only have your abstract to work with. And so you should avoid referring to a whole bunch of other things. You should tell people the story that they need to know in the context of those 300 words. So do make sure that it is self-contained and that it's concise and specific and it's really, really well put together and makes the most of those 300 words. And then the final one is just coherent and readable. So that your abstract makes sense, it will be easy for people to read, and will be very clear about what you're intending to present. There are some suggestions and ideas in the next slides that will help make your presentation improve the coherence and readability. The biggest piece of advice really is to write your abstract early so that you have time to revise and revise and refine and make it just that little bit better, so that by the time you submit, it's going to be the strongest, most powerful abstract that you can possibly submit. So in looking through previous years and thinking about why people end up with lower ratings, sometimes it can be that the abstract just doesn't include some of the required sections, and often people leave out the aims or objective section. And what that means is when people are rating those abstracts, they'll have to sort of, try to dig out what they think that you might be saying the aim or the objective of the project or the presentation will be, but it's going to be more difficult to rate that. So make sure you include each of the headings as suggested. Otherwise, you're just doing yourself no favours in terms of getting the best ratings possible. People can sometimes submit unstructured abstracts or things that feel a little bit like 300 words of stream of consciousness. I think that this is a good idea. And so you want to make sure that it's very structured and makes a clear presentation about what you will be including in the presentation or the poster. So work really hard to follow the structure and make sure that it's got a really good flow to it. Poor grammar and spelling mistakes just makes the reviewer think that you're a bit careless. And if you're not conscientious in terms of your grammar or your spelling, then how can we be confident that you're rigorous and have good attention to detail in your research or in the project you're describing? One of the common grammatical mistakes that people make is not understanding that the word data is actually plural. So the singular of data is datum. So we should always be using phrases like data were rather than data was. This can be difficult because in common everyday language, we're used to saying, it sounds weird if we say data were, but that's the scientific way of doing it. When I'm practicing, when I'm checking my own language, I always replace the word data with cats. So the cats were sounds right. The cats was sounds wrong. Don't ask me why I picked cats. I don't even really like cats, but I did, and it helps me to make sure that I'm using the correct grammar when it comes to the word data. Other common reasons for lower ratings is that the research isn't well explained, and when it's not well explained, the rater will sometimes presume that it's not well designed. Now, that's sometimes the case, but not always the case. So you're doing yourself no favours when you haven't explained your research really well, because it undermines our confidence in the rigour of that research. As I've mentioned several times, results presented in a vague way or not presented at all. I'll tell you what I found when you get there. Those kinds of things should be avoided, or the results are presented in a way that's confusing. Remember that the people who are rating your abstracts are experienced researchers, so that shouldn't be threatening, but it should make you make sure that you're presenting your results really clearly, because the people who are rating your abstracts will be familiar with this process, and if they get confused, then their confidence in your research is going to be diminished as well. If the conclusions aren't presented really clearly and the implications of the research aren't presented well, people can lose marks, and undersells or oversells the originality or the impact or the implications of the work is another reason that lower marks are given. Okay, so we've gone through all of those different hints and tips and tricks, and the most important thing for you to do now is to get your draft done early. Then when you get your draft done early, it gives you time to review and make it really, really strong and make it the most powerful abstract it can possibly be. So prepare a draft well in advance of the deadline. OTs are famous for leaving things to the last minute. Don't leave this to the last minute. Start early and do your best. First of all, try to make every sentence clear and add value to the abstract. Be really precise, clear. Use active voice throughout. That will really captivate and engage your reader and will engage your reviewer as well. So once you've done that and you've prepared what you think is the best abstract that you can, set it aside, go and do other things, come back to it a week later and have a look at it again. You'll have fresh eyes and you'll see things that could be improved. And then you can go back and you can review and you can revise it again. And during that time, you can also ask for feedback. If you have, friends, relatives, colleagues, anyone, get them to read your abstract and get them to provide you some feedback. If it's friends or relatives who might not have experience with these kinds of things, they can still be really helpful because they should, if it's a well-written abstract, they should be able to understand what you're saying, and they should be able to have a clear sense of the project and what your outcomes were. If they're confused by things, then maybe it is suggesting that you can simplify it and you can make it more accessible to a broader range of people. That said, some of the results, if you're doing research, and some of the results from your statistical tests might be unfamiliar to some people. Don't worry too much about that. Other people can provide you feedback around those, but the other sections should be clear and understandable to anybody off the street if it's a really well-written abstract. And when it comes to getting specific feedback, find other people who have successfully submitted abstracts to other conferences. Get their feedback. Listen to their suggestions and make improvements. Most people will have connections with people in those, people who have presented at conferences previously, but if you don't, then the abstract mentoring program can be really helpful. So when you're thinking about how you improve the quality of your writing, there are 3 R's: reduce, refine, and review. And so reduce means making sure that every word in your abstract is absolutely necessary. And so if there are unnecessary words in there, get rid of them. Try to avoid really, really long sentences. Breaking up a long sentence into several shorter sentences will both save words, but also make it much easier to read your abstract. Remove irrelevant details or repetitive text. Refining is really thinking about how can I make this message as clear and powerful and specific as possible. And reviewing is really just making sure that you've made no errors, your grammar is correct, your punctuation is correct, your spelling is correct, and your data are accurate. So, as I mentioned previously, we know that there will be some people who are new to writing abstracts and who don't have access to a wide network of people who can provide support and guidance. And so if that relates to you, then consider involving yourself in the abstract mentoring program. What this program does, it puts people into connection with members of the scientific committee, and we support new presenters or new abstract writers in developing and building the quality of their abstract. To engage with this project, you need to get your skates on and have a draft abstract written by the 19th of August. You prepare your abstract according to the submission guidelines that are on the website, but you put it together in a Word document rather than through the online submission portal. Then you email that abstract to conferences@otos.com.au, and that's with abstract mentoring as the subject line of your email. And then the conference team at the association will put you in connection with a suitably kind of qualified member of the scientific committee in your area of practice, who will work with you and who will provide some advice and suggestions on ways that the abstract can be enhanced. Then after that's done, you make those revisions and then submit your abstract through the usual process of submitting online. Should be noted that if you are involved in the abstract mentoring program, the person who mentored you won't be rating your final abstract, as there will be a conflict, but also it doesn't guarantee eventual acceptance. It will help you prepare your abstract, but then the abstract will go through the same review process as all other submitted abstracts. So overall, you've been through this kind of presentation, you've been listening to me talk for the last almost an hour. Main message is don't be afraid to submit an abstract. Start preparing early, don't leave it to the last minute. You're doing yourself no favours if you only give yourself 5 minutes to write an abstract. Even the most experienced abstract writers can't do it well in a short period of time. Seek advice from colleagues, friends, access the abstract mentoring program. Get all of the support you can. And even if your abstract doesn't get selected, it's still good practice for the future. And every abstract you write is better than the one before. And so start somewhere. Start with an abstract for this conference. And final tip is make sure you get your abstract in by the closing date, which is the 9th of September. So go forwards, write your abstracts, do your best, think about the things that you want to share with your professional colleagues from Australia and around the world. And if you have questions or you want more information, contact the conference team at that email address. And we look forward to welcoming you to the beautiful city of Sydney in July of next year. And we look forward to listening or reading your presentation or coming to your workshop or your occupation station. So I really encourage everyone to submit abstracts and come and join us for what's going to be an amazing conference in 2019. Thank you.